All right. Rohan Patel, comic book movie.
Nice to
Hey
meet
Jim,
you.
so how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
Um, I'm a big fan. First, I wanted to ask you something about your career, but I'll talk about the movie. But
Sure.
so as a father yourself, were you when you're like sort of picking your tone for your character, did you sort of draw on your own experiences before like just to get into character, or is it like just picking the right tone to talk to your children and stuff like that?
Yeah, I guess I mean that all kind of plays into it. I think I tried to make sure that Lorenzo, if he was distracted, which all parents are, he's not disinterested in his kid, you know. I think that's kind of a fine line, you know. Uh it's not as though Luca was being neglected at all. It's just that Lorenzo was distracted. And he obviously cares very deeply for Luca. So yeah, I guess you bring some of that into it, but and there is something about that parental relationship that anyone who had a parent knows that the parents kind of missed the barn. You know what I mean? So that's funnier than being a perfect parent.
Yeah, I mean, my parents were kind of like that, like the not necessarily helicoptery, but no dating when you're a teenager and all that stuff. So I
Yeah.
got and going out. Well, I mean, that's just Indian parents. But so like, have you had an opportunity to watch the film with your kids yet? Or
I have now with my kids. I got a screener, in preparation for this, but my family's back in New York, and so they don't like you to share the link and all that stuff. So
yeah, and so you had to correct me if I'm wrong, but you had to record from home, kind of,
yeah,
and so you're recording sort of by yourself instead of playing off. I think it's Maya, right? And
yeah.
so what did like was that kind of a weird experience, or was your experience as like a stand-up kind of like had prepared you for this kind of just playing off yourself?
Yeah, what's weird is like in a lot of voice acting stuff that I've done, it's usually, you're not in your house, you're in a studio, but there is almost something where uh anyone who owns a studio is not going to like me saying this, but like if you do have the equipment, because Pixar provided it, it's like people are comfortable at home. So it's like you're going to be comfortable as opposed to like driving somewhere or getting to a studio and recording. So there was probably some comfort that I felt in being, at home, even though like during the pandemic, all I wanted to do was leave the house.
Mm.
So yeah, I don't know, but even before the pandemic, there's it always surprises me, and I think it's so fascinating. It's a real compliment to how this stuff is edited. Is that you're very rarely ever recording with someone. Like I can't even think of the last time I did. Maybe on like Bob's Burgers, somebody else was there, but not all of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think Bob's Burgers is the only time they would have uh you recording with people that were in the scene. Maybe they'd be in LA or in Boston or something like that. But other than that, I often would be I've done lots just by myself and working with the director.
yeah. And did that give you like much room to like improvise or like do a bunch of alt takes, or what
Yeah,
was on the script? Was
there's always some ideas, but I think that with the Lorenzo character, it's I could improvise, but I also know that I don't want to get in the way of what this director or writer are trying to accomplish. Like if you have like a character that is trying to like, if we're trying to communicate that he's distracted by these show crowds, if you improvise around that, it's helpful. But if you go off on some tangent, that's not helpful. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
So it's like, yeah, there's some improvising, but I also have been kicking around long enough where you want to see if you can add some value, but you also don't want to create work for the person doing the project.
Yeah, yeah. And so you're a very successful comedian, writer, actor. And so like I was reading a little bit on your Wikipedia about like how you kind of you did a little bit of everything pretty much before you started finding success. And so when did you start like realizing that you were starting to find your voice or like your sense of humor that you were able to translate it into sort of a career?
Gosh, I would say that I made a living in commercials before. I mean, I was always doing stand up and I was doing acting, but I would say that I did commercials and then I did a lot of sitcom roles before I really did stand up. Like there was a time when my first comedy special came out, there was a blurb in the USA Today that said sitcom actor Jim Gaffigan does a stand up special. And I remember thinking that's so interesting because, like, in their perspective, I'm this sitcom guy. Whereas, now people probably think of me as a stand up who does acting. You know what I mean? And it's all, like we try to think that we have control over the perception, but in some ways you don't. You know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
like, I'm grateful for the success I have in stand up, but you know in this movie I'm the stand-up comedian who's doing voice work. You know what I mean? And that's
Yeah, yeah.
as long as I get to be in a Pixar movie, I'm happy.
Yeah, and so you're obviously like I know you from comedy. A lot most people would know you from doing a bunch of great comedy. But you're doing films like Luca, you've done Super Troopers, like those kind of like broad comedies, but then you're also able to like transform yourself into roles in like Chuck or Chappaquiddick or something like that. So is that like sort of
Yeah.
versatility, like when you're picking roles, is that sort of like versatility range something like you seek for when you're looking for different roles?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it really comes down to what's the most interesting thing to play. So, like, the reason I love indies is because you can play a character that um usually has a greater arc or like a more complex backstory. Whereas, if you play like a silly comedy, like, there's an arc for Lorenzo and Luca, but, and that's voice acting, but like in some kind of like silly movie, like you're kind of like a vehicle for jokes. Whereas like in an indie, it's also like what I enjoy. It's like I enjoy movies where the humor is much more the situation than a line. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, and I love kind of playing different characters. And so it's just kind of act. It's weird because like I think of acting as like the closest thing to like when you were a little kid. Like when we were dressing up kind of like police officers or cowboys or something, it's like that's all acting is. You're just
Mhm.
it's like I'm pretending now I'm Smee, I'm Mr. Smee. It's just absurd. And that's where it's really fun, when you can kind of get into a character and kind of build some motivation, because you really end up nerding out about some of the stuff, which is fun.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I guess we're almost running on time, so I don't want to keep you too long. But I had one of the earliest roles I can remember you from is when you played Roy on that '70s show, which is a really funny part, and I love that show so much. So I just wanted to ask you if like there was any talks at the time to like, because I think you only appeared in 6 or 7 episodes, and then we never hear from you again. But was there any talks for you to like become a recurring character on that show, or do you remember any like
Yeah,
good
there
time?
was there was like, it's weird because like there was there I did kept going back and forth because I was recurring on that show and I was also recurring on this show Ed. and so Ed was in New York, and 70 Show was in LA. But I think it was one of those things where there was talk of them adding me, just not as one of the kids, but
Mhm.
but there's I have 100 stories of like almost, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, no, I loved you on that show, and you're great in Luca, and I can't wait for people to see this movie. But thank you so much for your time, Jim. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. It was great
Appreciate it.
meeting you.
Thank you.